Oh, oh, phone call straight on that time. Hello, everybody. We are introducing an investor webinar today, which is suitable for investors and wannabe investors Australia-wide. So these webinars we do try to make quite generic where possible, but it's always good to still check with your property manager for state-by-state specific advice as well. So welcome to today. We are going to be talking landlord insurance with the lovely Brenda Hunter from PIP. Welcome.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks for inviting me. This is a great idea.
Yeah, I've got a whole series of them because there is, a lot of information where sometimes it doesn't always reach the investor. So it's sort of just great to have a bit of a platform to be able to do this. But also, I had a very interesting situation at work the last couple of weeks. So we've been going through our compliance and auditing in the back end to just check in with all our clients with landlord insurance and whether they've got it or not. So what we've done is we've gone through and we've checked everyone's policies. We've marked them on our system to say yes, they have a current policy, or no, their policy's lapsed. And then we've also got another section for landlords where we don't handle their insurance. We've asked them for a copy of it. What was really interesting is that we had probably about half a dozen owners who emailed me back to say, I've already got it, please find attach a copy. And when they've attached the copy, what they sent me was their strata or building insurance. And then I've gone back to them to say, actually, that's not your landlord policy that I'm looking for. I'm looking for your specific landlord policy. That's for your building and contents. And it's been such a great education piece. And I love the fact that I've been able to help them understand, because there's a lot of landlords out there who think that they're covered when in fact they're not.
Yeah.
So that's the point of doing today.
Yeah, love to fill in some gaps. And I'm seeing in my space lots of gaps as well. So I get calls from property managers, landlords, investors, wannabe investors, like lots of different people around Australia. And I'm seeing some common themes. So I'm very happy to share them through the podcast or webcast, apologies, today. So hopefully we can help lots of people.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because yes, it's a webinar, but it's also going to be converted into a podcast for the informed landlords. So we'll have it on both for those listening. So if there are anyone that's in here that has a question, please pop it into the Q&A or the chat, whichever one you're able to do. And then I'll ask Brenda as we go along as well. So please be interactive there. Now, the first question that I've got that I want to ask you is, can you explain what the difference is between building insurance and landlord insurance?
Perfect. That's a great question. And that's actually the main one that a lot of investors get stuck on. So let's think about the two common types of property. So we've got a freestanding home where the owner owns, all the land in a particular house. And then we can talk about something that's within a strata unit and a strata complex, because that's again a different type of insurance. So if we go to option one, so freestanding home, then you do need two policies. So we need what we call as a building policy, which is essentially your bricks and mortar, pools, patios, pergolas, fences. And then the second policy is your landlord insurance policy. So we do the combined together, which alleviates the gaps, but the owner can choose to split the policies if they choose. There are massive benefits of combining them. So I'll share some of those tips and pointers too. So touch on the landlord policy, then that's for rent loss and contents. So contents in an investor space is not the tenant's contents, because that's where a lot of owners get caught up, because they think, I don't want to insure the tenant's belongings. Well, no, that's not what this is about. This is about insuring the owner's products inside the home. So an example of that would be your curtains, your carpets, your light fittings, your underlay, floating floorboards, which I believe is quite unique for us. So that's a good one to make sure the owner's got cover for. And anything the owner leaves behind for the tenant's use. So when you're thinking about an apartment or a house, most properties these days have, for example, a dishwasher. So that doesn't fall under building because it's freestanding. It's actually contents. So all those items fall into the contents. So we cover 70,000 of that in our landlord policy, plus rent, which we'll go into in just a moment. So that would be fine for a strata home and for a freestanding house. So you need the landlord policy either way. Now, if it's your property's in a strata, then the building's generally covered by the strata company. So that's the outside and the common areas and the liability in the driveway, all of that's covered by the strata. So if you're an investor that's looking to purchase a strata company, you definitely want to get a copy of your strata building insurance and provide that to your property manager. So then they know what's covered in the strata space. Then the landlord policy covers inside your house and the tenant's rent, which obviously there's more involved with the rent part. But and then if it's a freestanding house, then you need both, because of course you need the building and the landlord. Now, a little bit about the building, which I see a lot of investors sometimes get this wrong. So I'll try not to be too blunt. So with the building, you've got to look at some things like standard perils. So standard perils in the insurance space just means things like a house fire or storm damage or impact damage or flood. So it's important to look at where your property is located so you've got insurance coverage for the home that you need. But the most important part is tenant damage. So fancy having a $500,000 building and you have a building insurance product that does not cover tenant damage, but you're allowing a tenant to live in your home. So that's where the risk lies. So a lot of your standard type of insurance companies, you might have to tick an extra box or, like go search a little bit more, but make sure you've got tenant damage, not just standard perils, the two combined together. So if you're an investor that you've moved out of a property and then you're going to start managing the home as a rental, then your current building insurance policy is owner occupied. You need to change it to an investment building policy because tenants are residing.
That's a very good tip, and definitely something that I think needs to be brought in. I mean, sure, you could sort of say, okay, well, my real estate hasn't mentioned it, but ultimately it falls down to the owner being educated and knowing this.
Owner's responsibility, because it's their home. Like, would you buy a 50,000 car and drive out of the car yard without insurance? Probably not. So why would you buy a $500,000 million house without actually insuring it? And the biggest risk is you're allowing the tenant to live in the property. So the chance of something happening would be pretty high. So you want to make sure that your building policy does have tenant damage. That's, if you take that away from today and that's the only thing, hopefully I've helped.
No, that's good. And it comes down to as well, like when it comes to smoke alarms and those compliance checks that investors need to do. And sometimes they might say to me, well, why do I have to do it? Like, I don't have to do it in my house. So why do I have to do it in my investment property? And then I would say it's because you've got a third party that you're having to cover. You've got, that's that risk there. You can't sue yourself. You've got to have that extra protection. One thing I see investors I often have to explain is the cover for rent on a building policy, and then thinking that that's for defaulting tenants, when quite often that loss of rent is related to a defined event.
So loss of rent is defined event. Yes. So that would be what's a good defined event? House flooding.
House fire or flood.
House fire. House is burnt down. So of course the tenant's going to go live somewhere else, but the owner's still left with the mortgage repayments to pay. So loss of rent is defined event. Whereas, and this is a great question, whereas rent default is the tenant not paying. So we're seeing on average, like rent default is actually probably one of the most claimable items in the landlord insurance space. So like we've got 20 weeks and we're seeing that, you need to make sure that you've got the amount of weeks, because there's many reasons why the tenant might default. I could think of hundreds. I mean, it could be you might be acquiring vacant possession. Look at our low vacancy rate all around Australia. So trying to find a new home to move into, the rent prices have gone up. So tenants trying to relocate into another property is more difficult. They might need to share, to afford the rental in homes. And then when they move and leave rubbish behind. So we have rubbish removal in our policy as well, because we're seeing that that's a big ticket item that's being used a lot for tenants. For kind of they align, like the rent default aligns with the rubbish removal and reletting in the policy too. So it's like a little package that we're seeing getting utilised quite frequently together.
Yep. And for investors to understand, the process of a tenant when they're not paying rent is quite a lengthy one, and you are relying on the court system and dates available quite often, and it does build up. So just to give a bit of an example, now this is obviously related for more Western Australia, so it will differ from state to state, but you've got a breach notice and or a termination process. So that can sort of take maybe 14 days, maybe 21 days, but plus a little bit of extra time, because you don't necessarily issue that on like day one, it might be on day 3. But then you've got to apply to court, and then you get given a court date, which might be in 2 or 3 weeks' time. You go to court, and then the courts say, we're going to adjourn this to a magistrate. So then it gets adjourned to a magistrate. You wait another 2 to 4 weeks. Then they might go, we're going to put this through to a trial. This is speaking from experience just recently. It goes to a trial. Oh my gosh. And now the process from us applying to court, which would have been 26th of December that I had applied, and it's still going at the moment. So it's a long process, and it is out of your control. So you need to have that rent default cover, like Brenda's saying, for a decent amount of time, because it does take time to go through the process, and you don't actually really have any control over that as well. And the rubbish removal, all of that, it does add up, and it's just that peace of mind. I think when we see investors buying properties and spending so much money, and then when it comes down to maybe the property management fees and landlord insurance, for some reason, they're the two things that people are a little bit, funny about.
And it's not a lot of money for a landlord policy. Like, it's less
No.
than your rent per week to cover you for a whole year.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So, I mean, we've got 30 minutes, but I could go on with many a story, as I'm sure you could as well, with regards to why you wouldn't have landlord, why you should have landlord insurance. The one, there was a post on a Facebook group the other day to say, if your investor doesn't want to take landlord insurance, what's the one thing you say to them to get them over the line? And my response to that, I don't know if you saw this question, my response was, I tell them about that time I had to call an owner and ask her to transfer $7,000 into my trust account to pay for a forensic clean. I said, for a tenant that had passed away in a property, I said, that's the story that I share, and that's the one that gets people over the line every single time. Good tenants. And that's the thing. Sometimes these policies, they're not, yes, they're going to be times where there's, not so great tenants, but there's also times where you've had great tenants and circumstances have changed. And I'm seeing that is actually very, very common. And me just going through the auditing with my landlords, to have owners say to me, we've got a really good, reliable tenant, why should I still have landlord insurance? That's, for me to respond back with, this is the reason why, because we had a really great tenant. He passed away in the property. He actually had a heart attack. And that's, he was good. So that's sort of something to consider. If someone said to you, why should you have landlord insurance? What would your response be?
Oh, easy, peace of mind. Just knowing that I've got a backup plan, I can sleep at night. So that would be the first thing that comes to mind. I just think that it's very little money, very little outcome for a whole year, just to know that I've got all that coverage. Like, obviously I'm in this space, and as you know, I've been in property management for many years prior to here, and the amount of unforeseen circumstances that happen that no one can prevent. So, like, tenants, ironing a shirt on the carpet, or the iron falling on the carpet, and then that, being damaged, and then trying to relet the property with the burn mark is just, obviously you're not going to attract such a good quality tenant. So it's about maintaining the properties as well. And yeah, unforeseen. So going back to your court case, I really like that one, because bailiff is one of the things that's very costly, and it's an unexpected surprise. So bailiff fees, we're seeing, $1,200, $1,500 just to remove the tenant from the property. And, with the low vacancy rate, we're seeing that being utilised quite commonly. Like, ours has zero excess and all the rent and bailiff fees and all those things. So you just make a claim, so it's quite easy. But imagine if you didn't have it, never mind the forensic claim because someone's passed away. So you never know. And the property manager can't stay guard at the front of the property and make sure nothing happens. I mean, the tenant could lose their job. They could make a new friend that's not really a desirable friend, so it's peace of mind, I think, for
Totally. What was I going to say about with the bailiff, we've actually had a couple just recently with bailiffs, and it's interesting. A tenant's mindset at the moment is that we explain to them the process, we explain to them they've been evicted, they've got a court order, we explain to them that the next step is a bailiff, and it's very, very sad, but these tenants have said, you just do what you do and I'll just wait to that point. So what we're finding is tenants are just at the stage where they're completely, hands up in the air, surrendering to the process, and they're waiting because they've got nowhere else to go. So at least they're going to be safe in their house until that bailiff physically removes them, which is super sad for many reasons, but also just to prove and show that people are waiting to that point because they feel like they have no other option, and this is the only way they can stay with shelter for as long as possible, and so they will let it get to that stage. I mean, it's so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, and it just gives them a few more weeks knowing that they're safe under a main roof, especially if they've got children too. So
Yeah,
they are utilising their rights, and I think tenants are more informed these days as well.
yeah.
So they know the time frame. So like your tenant from Christmas through till now, we're in February, and you still might have a few more weeks before vacant possession. If there's no rent there, I mean, that's a long period of time waiting for that tenant to potentially pay or move out and then, claim back, I guess, the bond or insurance policy, I guess, if the owner's got one. So
Mm.
another big thing that I'm seeing investors do too, and that's something that's not readily advertised, is how the tenant pays the 4 weeks bond when they move into the property. Well, it's a really important question to ask if the insurance company, what happens to the bond if I make a claim? So like with us, we just say use it. Like don't give it back to the tenant, of course. And if you need to make a claim, then use the bond first. We don't apply that as part of the excess. So the owners are really advantaged with that extra 4 weeks bond that you utilise in the property. And one other tip too is some things that aren't covered by insurance is housekeeping items or maintenance. So I feel like that's an important touch point as well, because we want to make sure that the bond there could be used for the owner to, say, clean the carpets or, some general things, whereas that would be an out-of-pocket expense for the owner if they choose a company that takes the bond as part of the excess.
I'm seeing that a lot lately. And yeah, obviously like today we can't mention other companies, but that's one of the biggest things I would always say is, can you have a look at the PIP policy? Can you compare it against yours and just have a look at the differences in it? And the excess is one of the biggest ones. And while at the start, I think some landlords would say, oh, it's not too bad. When you are already been without rent for a couple of months, that hurts. It hurts so much. So it might not seem like a big issue while you've got rent coming in, but the truth is you don't have rent coming in, and it's completely out of a pocket again when you're already out of pocket.
And you don't know when it's coming too. So that's when it becomes stressful.
Yeah.
And that's where I was meaning before. It's like it just gives you a bit of peace of mind. Like not everything is 100% covered by insurance, like housekeeping, as I gave that example. But at least if you know the big ticket items or the majority of are likely to be covered, just helps.
Yeah, absolutely. The any landlords that are going through a situation where they have got a tenant who's showing those red flags, they're pretty sure they're going to have to go down the road of landlord insurance. Is there something that they should be doing prior to having to physically put that claim in? Is there any prep work, things to consider that they should know of?
Just follow the Resident Tenancies Act in your state. So that's definitely one thing. And I think if you follow the right rules, then you're okay. So I do see private investors fall into that hole of maybe sitting on their hands for a bit, and that could jeopardise the claim. Whereas it's really important that they do the right thing by the tenant and by their laws. So I mean, I would always advise go with a real estate company because they know what they're doing, and I'm seeing every state change their laws. So, I mean, it'd be very difficult for a private landlord to get their head around everything that's happening in every single state for every property. It's easier for us because we're in that space. But yeah, so I feel like just making sure that they know what they're doing, educate yourself, follow the rules, and you should be okay. Ask the right questions. When making a claim, it depends on what the claim is. So if it's a big ticket claim, like obviously a house fire, lodge it straight away, even if you don't have the details, because you're going to speed up the claim. But if it's, for example, fence that goes down or a tenant that's damaged something like a roller door or something in the property or some carpets in the landlord space, then of course you can, get your quotes and then pop it through all on one claim form, which we do online. So it's quite a simple process. So yeah, but the quicker you lodge the claim with all the details, the quicker you're going to get an outcome.
Okay, I want to ask a couple of questions, and hopefully you can answer. If you can't, just say I can't answer that, because I know to sort of
general advice here, Ash. I can't go delving now,
No, I know it is general advice. And obviously this is going to be specific, I must say as well, for different policies. So you always have to get advice and check your T's and C's for your insurance company. But I would be interested to know, can you submit quotes as opposed to invoices? Because like the owner, does need to go ahead with it. But
So I think like if we're to do a simple claim, say offence, and we know that it's 8 sheets have come down, And if you do a quote and it's in the zone, we're likely just to accept the quote, go get the job done, and we can use your contractors if you prefer, because you've got a relationship with them. So that's not a problem. If you get a quote and it's like way outside what we're expecting, we're going to ask you to get another quote, like to be fair, because, we deal with this all the time. We're going to know, what 8 sheets of fencing is going to cost. So, yeah, so
and I think it's also again, just from an education point of view, because I want to educate owners so they know how to work with us better as well, because there will be times where we might have to say, listen, like, you're not going to be able to submit a quote and expect a cash settlement to put in your pocket. You need to provide an invoice and take the risk, as well. That's what sometimes I find.
So every case is different and it all depends on what's happening. So I would just advise asking the question from your claims person as you're submitting the claim. Obviously, we want the properties maintained and things fixed. So, and also we know that the owner needs to confirm what it's going to cost. So it's just about having good communication. With anything there.
Yeah, excellent. So always just check that first and be guided by your property manager and your insurance company with what they allow and what they don't. Can we just quickly go through the difference between malicious and accidental damage? In the past, I've actually been called out a little bit with malicious, accidental, and deliberate damage. Are there still 3 options?
Yes. Okay. So let's think about the carpet in the master bedroom. So if it's accidental damage, the tenant's accidentally done something. So they might have, I was trying to give a good example, but I would keep it as a simple.
Some wine or something, spilled a glass of wine.
So we'll say that they just knocked over a glass of wine in the bedroom, right? But the carpet's been damaged accidentally, so it wasn't intentional. Deliberate might be the tenants like ironing. We see this quite often in the property management space where they neglect to use an ironing board and they iron their shirt on the floor and then they burn a mark on the floor. And of course, that's deliberately damaged because they haven't used an ironing board. So they've deliberately damaged it, or they've used a scissors and cut something, so that would be deliberately. Or malicious, was it with angry intent? So I would suggest speaking to the claims team to try and clarify what bucket the damage falls into, but either way it's damage by the tenant, so you could call it tenant damage. There is different excesses for us, so if it's deliberate damage we actually have removed the excess, so it's 0, whereas accidental damage has got a $250 excess, which is incredibly low anyway. But yeah, just get some clarity from the claims team. If you want me to give you an example on the building policy, so say accidentally drove the car through the roller door, or they might have acted deliberately, or maybe that was malicious because it was angry intent. So you kind of see how sometimes it's a little bit grey, but it's still damaged by the tenant. So I feel like full disclosure, provide some evidence and the claims team will support you. So yeah, that makes sense. Does that clarify? Is it a little bit blurry still?
No, it does. And I guess it's also just to highlight that there are sometimes 3 different options that we don't know about. So it's good to check if your policy covers that as well.
Check that it's in there, because I don't see all insurances maybe having all 3 options too. So you want to make sure that you're supporting your owner with, with the policy that they have, so using the right terminology. And if you're not sure, maybe just call it tenant damage or ask the claims team.
Excellent. Now, last question for you. Or actually, hold on. I've got 2 questions that I want to ask you. Okay. Can you clarify periodic leases?
Okay, so we've got 2 types of lease agreements. We've got fixed term, where they have a start date and then they have an end date. Periodic leases means that they've got a start date, but at the end date, they haven't then signed a new agreement again. So it rolls over to what we call as a periodic lease, which just means it runs from, day to day, month to month, week to week, whatever that might be. So within our insurance policy, like fixed term and periodic leases is the same, because the tenant's still in the property. So we still cover, say, rent default, most claimable item, we've got 20 weeks, which is phenomenal. So we would cover up to the 20 weeks, whether it's the fixed term or the periodic, so whatever would expire first. So that's how we use it. But that's definitely a good one to check, because in other insurance companies that might change. So you want to make sure you've got the right coverage if the tenancy changes, the tenancy lease agreement. So
Perfect.
Yep. Good question.
And last question for you is, what is the best way to compare policies? If an owner's got a policy, they want to make sure it's the right one for them. Do you have any tips on how they could compare and
Yep. Okay. Oh, all right. This is a good one. So some owners just go price driven. So, but I'm not one of those owners. However, our policy, I believe, is probably the cheapest price at the moment. So, which is really good, but I'm more about the layers of quality within the policy and what the outcome would be if I was to make a claim. So obviously rent to default, I've managed that. I'd want to make sure that that is about the 20-week mark. So that would be very important for me. I'd also want to be making sure that the contents has those extra layers of like curtains, carpets, light fittings, floating floorboards, underlay, and anything the owner leaves behind. So if you've got an apartment, you want to make sure things like your dishwasher and your fridge and your bed and cupboards and all those things are covered as well. So rather than having then a third policy, so that would be important in that aspect. I'd definitely be checking the excesses, because that's the unexpected surprise when you're already quite stressed as making a claim is what's it going to cost me. So the access is completely up to the owner to choose in the building space. So it's really important that that the owner gets some advice on that one. So if the fence goes down, what's the access you choose? Because that's going to determine how much you pay. So if you're looking to decrease or increase your policy, you can play with the excess amount. Oh, there's so much here, Ash. Building, I would 100% make sure I got tenant damage. Like I wouldn't even mind if it was like, you know, $100 more. Like that is coins in the scheme of things, really, to make sure you've got the tenant damage to your like beautiful investment property. So yeah, so price driven, but absolutely would be number one for me would be quality. So those big ticket items need to be in there for me.
Amazing. And you know, are you seeing most investors, most clients, are they reviewing every year, every couple of years, keeping an eye on their policy?
Yeah, some do, some don't. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and it's definitely a good tip to owners, to investors to pick up. I do see the savvy investors call me every year and, you know, want to know what's changed, what's updated, all those things. And then we get others that just ignore it until they need to make a claim. It's really important that if we were to change something in the policy, we let you know on renewal. So maybe don't automatically just renew your policy. Have a look at it. So if there's something that's been pulled out that you want to make sure that you're not renewing the policy, accepting that change. So that's really probably the best tip. So even property managers, don't automatically renew, pop that out to the investor, let them accept the new terms. I mean, how would you feel if you remove, say, fire and then you're in a fire zone and you just automatically renew the policy? That could be quite risky for the investor and the property manager. So yeah, I would 100% just have a little tweak, look over it. Building sum automatically gets increased. You can accept that if you want to, or, you know, have a discussion around maybe reducing that back if you choose. But yeah, you want to make sure that building sum amounts definitely at the right space in case something goes wrong in the property. So yeah.
Amazing. Now it's very rare that you and I keep to a time limit, and we have. So well done to both of us.
Yeah, this is impressive.
And I mean, and the idea again is just to really put a couple of little feelers out there, a little couple of, you know, golden nuggets for owners just to start thinking about. And obviously you do need to go back, you need to read your own policies, understand your state legislation, speak to your property manager. And ultimately what we've sort of summarized today is you're the landlord, you're the owner. You are responsible to understand your policy and understand the process. So that always comes first. And obviously you can take some guidance, you know, from your property manager as well. But even just knowing these couple of little things that we discussed, hopefully can, you know, take you down the rabbit warren just a little bit if you need to. So I like definitely just to summarize a couple of things, just that tip with making sure that if you were an owner occupier, that you have changed that to an investment property and that risk has been allowed. Doing a comparison of your policy, keeping an eye on the excess is really, really important on somewhat a regular basis, and not just paying your renewal every 12 months, actually just having a quick look at if there's been any changes there, and just understanding the difference in the coverage that you've got, and just really doing those comparisons with other policies to make sure that you're on the right track. And you know, call your property manager and say, I'm just renewing my my insurance. Is there anything, you know, that I should be aware of, or anything that you've noticed? You know, any questions that you've got, and go from there as well. So even just those little things we've discussed, I think, can have a massive impact with getting people to start understanding their policies more. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And that is Brenda from PIP. Now, can investors and landlords contact PIP directly as well? Like they can be direct and speak to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got head offices in pretty much every state around Australia. We insure from Anything below the 26 parallel, so Kalbarri in WA over to Hervey Bay or Harvey Bay, depending on what side of the country you're from in Queensland, and anything south from there. But absolutely, I'll email you some details if you like. So if anyone makes inquiries, then you can send them some details and some information about the policy in every state. And I would definitely, for all investors, try and combine the building and the landlord. I feel like you're going to save a few dollars, and if you go to make a claim, it's one claim, not two. So 2 more tips before we go.
Amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ash, for having me.
Thank you, Brenda. No worries. We'll chat to you soon.
Thank you.